Welcome back to the American Investor. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, I'm your host, Lasali Nungu, and let me tell you, I've got a great show lined up for you. My good friend John Bogan is back in the building after so many requests. He's back. Of course, the link to his new book is in the description. Let me go ahead and get the show started on my end. Grab something to drink, relax, sit back. It's going to be a great show. We're going to drop so many dimes on you. You're going to learn a lot. Give me 3 minutes. We'll be right back. Looking to learn the real deal in advanced option strategies? How to make money when the stock goes up, down, or sideways? Check out the classic video course by David Valeries at NoDirectionTrading.com. Over 30 hours of content organized into 56 videos with detailed audio commentary, leaving nothing out. Enjoy this course from your home and learn at your own pace. Follow how I stopped trading price and started trading time and become a much more profitable trader. Get the entire course now at NoDirectionTrading.com for less than $50. This price won't last. Get it from the man who's been teaching since 1998, David Valeries. NoDirectionTrading.com. NoDirectionTrading.com.
For years, I ran and ran and ran. I struggled for years with bad credit, bouncing from different prepaid cards just to avoid collections and judgments that were ruining my life. My low credit score got me denied jobs in government and any job having to do with money. Things got so bad, I was denied an apartment and even an iPhone. I knew I had to take some bold action. I decided I was going to fight back. I learned about federal laws people like me can use to dispute illegal and inaccurate accounts and get judgments removed. I created powerful credit dispute letters that challenged everything, and I wasn't afraid to take a creditor to court if I had to. It took time for things to get better, but I was able to raise my score over 400 points, and I'm here to tell you that you can do it too. Get my powerful credit dispute letters at fightyourscore.com. That's fightyourscore.com, so you too can stop running.
Black Box Stocks is an automated trading system that delivers real-time market alerts using a proprietary algorithm. Our system is composed of high-speed servers monitoring over 13,000 NASDAQ, NYSE, Amex, and OTC stocks at the same time, analyzing each tick multiple times per second. This award-winning system levels the playing field by offering you technology that has too often been reserved for large financial firms, hedge funds, and the Wall Street elite. And when it comes to the results, let's just say that they are really, really good. Don't wait any longer. Visit blackboxtrader.org to start generating big gains right now.
Have you been looking for a way to make money on YouTube but don't want to be in front of the camera? Let me introduce you to my friend Mike Williams over at onlinevideoincome.com. He's prepared to show you how to make money from YouTube with no marketing, no filming, and no website. See, there are millions of videos being made every day from television to social media that you can post on YouTube to earn regular income. Mike will show you how to get these videos and generate a monthly check for you and your family every single month. So why wait? Start making money with the #1 video site in the world, YouTube, with onlinevideoincome.com. That's onlinevideoincome.com. Check it out right now. Yes, what's going on, everyone? It's your boy Sal, man. I am the American Investor. I am back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to put this show on for you guys. Can't wait to be back live, possibly next week, maybe the week after. I don't know. I've been really enjoying the fact that I've been making a lot of money trading time instead of actually trading price. It's been incredible, ladies and gentlemen, the way I've changed up on a lot of the ways that I've pursued this craft called trading. But today I'm here to bring back my good friend John Bogan. John wrote the incredible book. I hope you picked it up. The link is in the description, called Say No to Big Government. Every person should read this book. Every black person should definitely be reading this book because we've got a lot of communist tendencies in our community that we need to get rid of. But this book will definitely be the cure for that. We're going to red pill a lot of people today, drop a lot of good game on the public today. And I'm glad to have John with me. And I'm going to call him in just a second. In fact, let's go ahead and do it right now. Let's give him a call right now and get John in the building to start spitting that good game. And we're going to discuss a lot of topics that I want to bounce off his head that have to do with the market, that have to do with society. And we're going to let him speak on it and let his wisdom shine through. Man is incredibly bright. Support him by getting his book. That's going to be in the description. Click that, support him. It's less than $20. Say No to Big Government is the book. Let's get him on the air. Just a second here.
Hello?
Hey, John, is this you?
Yeah, this is me.
John, appreciate you, bro. Thank you so much for coming on the show again, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate to be back on your show for round 2.
Yes, man. And we got a lot to discuss today. And, let's get straight to it. Of course, as I said earlier, ladies and gentlemen, I have the man himself, Jonathan Bogan, the author of Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom, available at Amazon.com. The link is in the description. Get this man's book right now. Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. And John, since you've been on the show, man, I got a ton of emails. I definitely hope that people followed through and bought your book. But with that being said, a lot of news has happened as well since you've been on the show. Argentina, so many of these South American companies, and then we got, Italy financial situation. You get a bailout, everybody gets a bailout. What's going on with Argentina? Can you explain a little bit about it and how now we're already seeing the IMF wanting to jump in and save Argentina with another bailout?
Yeah, well, Argentina has been having problems for almost the last century. And the thing that you got to remember about financial crises and economic downturns is that they're all the same but different. So they're different in that there are different events that may take place that come to speed up a financial crisis. For example, a bank may fail, or you may have consumers spending less money for another reason, or there might be a natural disaster that takes place, or a political decision, a bill that was passed that's controversial, that deals with money or that deals with some kind of regulation. So in other words, there are different events that can spark a financial crisis or that can make a crisis worse. But every single crisis is the same in that they all begin with creating money out of nothing. And there's 2 ways to do that. Last time when I was on your show, I did mention something called fractional reserve lending, and we didn't have time to talk about that back then, but we can definitely talk about that now.
Absolutely.
So there's 2 ways to create money. There's one way is for the government to print it or to mint it. You're actually creating physical paper, bills, or physical coins. That's one way. Another way is to create money through fractional reserve banking. Now, what that is when you put money, what it is it's a bank under fractional reserve banking has the right to take the majority of its reserves out of the accounts of its depositors and then loan that money out to people who are pledged to pay it back with interest. And when that money is paid back, that money is supposed to go back into the depositors' accounts with interest. So if you have a savings account and you see that the bank paid you interest on the money that's in your account, then what that means is the bank actually borrowed the majority, 90% or more in most cases of that money was borrowed from your account and then loaned to someone else, who then is making payments on that money and is coming back to you. So by doing that, the bank is actually creating money by creating debt. They're going into your account and they're taking money and they're loaning it out. They should never be allowed to do that, but unfortunately every bank in the world does that. So in Argentina, you have massive debt formation, and that's been going on for several years. You have the government printing money for all kinds of things, paying government workers, government programs. You have taxes that have gone up on imports. That slowed their economy. It made it to where the Argentinian businesses could not export much, because whenever you raise taxes on imports, countries that you are taxing by raising those taxes are going to raise taxes on your exports. That's a trade war. That's something that has been talked about in the news regarding what Donald Trump has been talking about doing with China. But you know, if that hasn't yet really gotten going, and I sure hope it doesn't, because a trade war can ruin an economy. We saw that during the 1930s with the Great Depression. But Argentina has had bad economic policy for generations. Printing too much money, spending too much money, creating too much debt. Back in 2001, they defaulted on over $150 billion. That's the largest default by any country in world history. 155, I think, billion dollars that they defaulted on. And their inflation rate has been in double digits for decades. That is unheard of in American history. I think this year they're going to have an inflation rate of 40%.
Wow.
Which is mind-boggling, because we had bad inflation. I mean, we had bad inflation too, but it's nothing like that. But back during the 70s, and I talked about this a little on your show last time, we left the gold standard in 1971. We then started to see double-digit inflation for several years during the 70s and early 80s. And then for a period of time, the inflation was cut off because interest rates went to almost 20%. And then they began to fall and inflation kicked up again. But Argentina has had double-digit inflation for the last could be the last 30 years or so. And the government actually is trying to create more inflation because they had an inflation target of 8 to 12% last year. And they raised it to 15%. That means that they want to print so much money, and they want banking policy to be such that so much money is loaned out that the inflation rate goes to 15%. So this is why Argentina is in such a mess, because they're printing too much money, they're creating too much inflation, their economy is not growing fast enough, it's overtaxed, overregulated, and inflation is like a tax. So when you create inflation, it's the same thing as if you raise taxes. And as a result, now they got to get a bailout from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And this is a bailout with no strings attached. So it's free money almost for them. And the point of that is to make it easier for Argentina to take the cash. Because once you put strings on it, then there's an issue of whether or not they'll take the cash, and if they don't take it, their economy will collapse more. So with this whole bailout, all it is, it's going to fuel more inflation, It's going to prevent Argentina from actually climbing out of the mess it's in, because the economy needs to implode. They need to go to a sound system that doesn't create money from nothing. They need to eliminate fractional reserve banking, which, by the way, every country does that. We do that, but that's where almost all the inflation comes in, is when the banking system is able to lend out money that it doesn't have by going into your account and getting the money. They need to stop printing money. They need to go to a system where they have a strong currency, tie it to gold, tie it to land, or tie it to something that is scarce. And that's the only way Argentina will be able to get out of this mess, because they've been in it for decades, and it's only going to get worse. The IMF, as you mentioned, is coming in, and they're going to come in with you mentioned Italy. They're coming in, I think, over the next few months and years with more bailouts from more countries.
It's almost sad to see, John, because we've had in the past, particularly African leaders who have tried to establish a way to get their currencies backed by what's underneath their feet. You can just recently Muammar Gaddafi, and then we saw what happened with him. I mean, they basically destroyed this man's country and reinstituted the African slave trade, man. And we know what's happened there. So there is definitely some kind of policy unwritten and unsaid that you better not go to a pegged type economy or a system of financial means where your currency is pegged to some scarce resource. Who benefits when a country has a fiat currency? Who exactly wins when a company or a country rather can just print out as much money as it wants?
Well, the wealthiest people are the ones who benefit from inflation. And inflation is just a product of creating too much money. No matter who does it, once that money circulates in the economy, then you have inflation. Prices go up, and it's the rich, it's the wealthy who benefit the most from that, because they own most of the assets. They own most of the stocks. They own the real estate. They own gold. They own silver. They own land. I mean, they own so much of what becomes more expensive. You can look at the American stock market. It's been going up. I mean, it's been on a downswing since the beginning of this year. But between 2009 and earlier this year, the stock market has been going up pretty much the entire time, with a few corrections here and there, but those only lasted a few weeks, and then we went to new highs afterwards. And the reason for that is because during the financial crisis, the government printed money by the trillions of dollars, and the Federal Reserve came with trillions of dollars of loans and gave it to the banks, because banks were failing. They wanted to make sure that new banks would not fail, following those that already failed. And with all of the bailouts that came, we saw that money go right into the stock market, because people want to buy low and sell high. And the stock market had fallen over 50%, between 50 and 60% between 2007 and 2009. And so a lot of this money went into stock buybacks. A lot of hedge funds were advising people to jump into the stock market. They were putting their money in. And this is cheap money. This is money borrowed at nothing percent. Interest rates went down to zero, and they were kept at zero for several years. So money was very, very cheap. I mean, it was free, basically, free money. And it went into, and so stock prices rose. Real estate began to rise after 2012 when things bottomed out. Real estate started to come back, and it's still rising because money has been made available for people to buy homes. It's all printed, and it's fractional reserve lending. It's money from nothing. But the combination of government and Federal Reserve policy came in to create this big wave of inflation, but it didn't hit the grocery store until 2011. And even then, it wasn't as high as it could have been. But inflation has come into our economy. It went into the stock market, real estate market. It went into gold. Gold has been rising since '09, and silver. And who owns that? It's the rich. It's the wealthy. They own most of that. So when you create inflation, you're actually stealing money from the poor and the middle class and giving it to the rich, because it's the poor and the middle class who have to pay for the inflation. When they buy stocks, they're paying an inflated price. When they buy homes, when they try to buy gold or silver, or when they go to the store and they buy something, they're paying an inflated price. Gasoline, energy, anything that is going up, people are paying for, and it's those who own it who receive the money. So this is a redistribution. It's a terrible redistribution of wealth from those at the bottom to those at the top. And you were mentioning last time Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. Bernie Sanders touches on the redistribution of wealth. Now, he's totally wrong on what to do about it.
Absolutely.
But he has shown us that there's a problem, that money is going from the bottom to the top. And he's right. Mm-hmm. I agree that money is flowing from the bottom to the top, but Bernie Sanders does not say that it's because the government's printing too much money. He doesn't say it's because of fractional reserve lending. In fact, he wants to spend more money. That's where he's wrong. Mm. He wants to raise taxes and make, college free and health care free, and so that would only create more inflation. So the rich are absolutely raking everybody over the coals, and they support this. Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, said that Ben Bernanke, he was the Federal Reserve Chairman from 2006 to 2014, he called him a hero. Mm. Ben Bernanke is the guy who printed all that money, is the guy who did those bailouts from the Federal Reserve. And Warren Buffett says he was a hero, an American hero. I say he's an American villain, because we're suffering from the inflation that he caused.
Wow. Excellent. John, ladies and gentlemen, again, I have the man himself, Jonathan Bogan, author of Say No to Big Government. John, and I want to start from the beginning. At the beginning, in chapter 1, you talk about, basically the roots of where the ideology comes from, of the progressive movement, and how it began from the 19th century as an anti-industrial force, and it's kind of morphed into this kind of anti-poverty, wealth redistribution kind of program and force. We've got a lot of, and basically they're communists now, and that sentiment has now been in the black community now, John, for, in America, period, but in particular the black community, because that's what we both know best, for almost 50 years now, John, and we've seen how it's completely decimated communities where, were once thriving and strong communities now are bastion of crime and poverty and broken homes. Recently in the state of Georgia, as recently as actually the other day, yesterday, I believe, a black woman was just now inaugurated as the Democrats' I guess selection or she's going to be basically their person running for governor of the state of North Carolina. Not North Carolina, Georgia. And this woman has very leftist policies. She wants to institute free college education. She wants to institute a way to allow the state to pay for your medical bills in some kind of fashion, either be a portion or all of it. Speak to the kind of dangerous tendencies now that, under the Trump administration, yes, we're seeing a lot of people make a lot of money who unfortunately aren't the people who need to be making the money. But why is it wrong for us to be clinging towards the kind of policies that are going to end up with more inflation than less? Why have we still been doing the same thing over and over again, electing these kind of leaders?
Well, that is a really, really good question. And actually, it's the thing that I am still, it's bewildering. But that's probably the most important question of our time. Why do Americans continue to return the same incompetent leadership back to power? And I would say there's a few reasons, but the biggest reason is because people just don't know any better. They think that they know how to pick a good candidate. They think that when somebody says, I'm fighting for you, I'm on your side, we're going to do this together, and be told basically, vote for me, that's all you need to hear. And every single candidate says that they're going to help you. So people, they don't vote based on issues. They vote based on what somebody says, how they say it, how they look on camera. It's all about charm and charisma and performance in front of a camera, how you talk in a debate. And it's those little things that causes people to say, oh, that's my guy. That's the guy I want to pick. I mean, look at him. He's married, he's got 5 kids, and they all look great, and they're all going to college, and, this is just a nice family, and he spent all these years working to help people in government, and, what gets lost in that are the actual issues and the world views and the positions on monetary policy, tax policy, education and healthcare policy, regulations on real estate, regulations on so many different things that are causing people to have to pay more for the things that they want. That gets lost in these political campaigns. And political debates are not serious about showing us what they think. It's a show. It's basically when you get candidates on stage, what people want to try to get is the candidates fighting each other, or get the candidates to say something that's controversial, attack each other. It's great TV. Get an audience to cheer and boo and make noise, and it just, I find it insulting. I find it really tragic, because we're dealing with serious issues. Free health care doesn't exist. Any candidate who tells you, I'm going to give you free health care, garbage. There is no such thing. Everything costs money. I'm going to give you free medical care. Bernie Sanders says he wants Medicare for all, free college tuition. This candidate in Georgia who's running for governor seems to be saying the same thing, and you can maybe find some money coming in from the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party easily. And nobody's blowing the whistle and saying, wait a minute, there's no such thing as, where's the money going to come from? Are you going to raise taxes? Are you going to cut spending in other areas? Are you going to get more money from the federal government? how are you going to raise the money? Well, without slowing down the economy. See, because you got to tie all this in together. If you raise taxes, you're going to slow down the economy. If you print money and you create inflation, you're going to slow down the economy, which is what's happening in Argentina, because inflation is a tax.
Wow.
So it is, no one's calling these candidates out except for those who actually understand economics, who understand the policies of free market capitalism. But the people they don't know any better. So they need to, this is what inspired me to write this book. I didn't know any better until the financial crisis inspired me to learn about economics. And as I learned and learned, I said, man, I'm finding out so much, I got to help other people learn what I have learned. Mm-hmm. So the book was me trying to put information out there that I've learned to help other people learn, because I want them to change their votes. I am tired of seeing Democrats and Republicans getting elected. None of them are committed to smaller government. None of them are committed to restraining government spending. In fact, just a few days ago, Rand Paul is a senator from Kentucky. He's the only libertarian in the Congress, and I think I said last time, the only person worth anyone's vote. Mm-hmm. But he proposed a budget that was going to cut, I think, 1% a year from all government programs for the next few years and not add any new spending, and the budget would balance in 5 years.
Wow.
It's a plan called the penny plan. It's called the penny plan because it cuts a penny, or it cuts 1% of spending from all government programs without adding any new spending for the next several years. And the budget balances in 5 years according to projections. This budget was defeated in the Senate 2 times. Mm. This plan was proposed last year, and 80-something senators out of 100 voted against it. A few days ago, it was brought up again. 70-something senators out of 100 voted against it. And when you get that many senators voting against something, it's bipartisan. You're getting a mixture of Democrats and Republicans voting against a budget that would balance, and the Republicans voted against it because they said it would threaten military spending. They don't think we're spending enough on the military. So, once again, the only person in Congress who I think deserves anyone's vote is trying his best to save this country from bankruptcy. And on 2 occasions, he was shut down. His legislation was put away by both parties. So, but I'll bet you most people don't know that.
Right.
They're too busy doing other things, and they got to pay attention to politics. They got to pay attention to the issues if they want to vote for the right candidate.
That's true. And John, we had a very interesting article come out a few days ago. This is May 18th. It was very popular that day. Almost half of U.S. families, this is the title, almost half of U.S. families can't afford basics like rent and food. This was on CNN Money and then spread out to other outlets. And, in the article, they kind of hint to families having to go as far as moving in with each other to be able to, afford basic living arrangements. And because rent has gotten to become so expensive, particularly if you live in some of these urban areas, where it's making up nearly almost, 50% or more of your monthly income. They say your rent is supposed to be about 30%. I don't know who lives in a major city anywhere where rent is 30% of your income, particularly if you're in the working class. I haven't met a working class person who's paying less than 30% of their income in rent. I mean, I haven't seen that in years. Yeah, that kind of goes back to the inflation question, but how long can we be able to manage this? Because, John, we talk about them being, it being a red day or a day zero when all this has to correct, but I'm hearing from financial managers, money managers, who are saying, well, the deficit can go it can go as high as long as the deficit stays to a percentage of GDP that's manageable. Then we can continue to print as much money as we want, right? What do you have any takeaways from the whole percentage of GDP argument? The fact that as long as we keep producing, have a positive GDP, we can continue to just kind of print money as much as we want, even though, as we can see here, unemployment, quote unquote, is falling, but most of Americans can't afford basic services, can't afford homes, can't afford to even go on vacation. I mean, how long can we live in a country, or how long can we sustain a country where just, the top 10% win and the rest kind of lose over time?
Well, I saw also the statistic that you put out. I read this a few days ago, that 40% of all Americans can't even come up with $400 to cover an emergency expense.
Jesus.
40% cannot come up with $400, and that's a car repair. Anytime that something happens with your car, if it's not routine maintenance, I mean, that can easily cost you $400 or more. So this happened to me not that long ago. I had my muffler actually fell off my car when I was going over some railroad tracks in southeast Michigan. I was driving back home, and I went over some railroad tracks, and the muffler came off. And we took it to the shop, and they told me that was going to be about $600 to fix that. Now, I'm a saver. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a saver. I save as much as I can because I believe in making sure that I have some reserves, always somewhere.
Absolutely.
Because you got to look out for your own financial health, and you just have to have a lifestyle where you're able to always put away money. Every time you get a check, you want to be able to put away money somewhere. So that expense was huge, but not really. I was able to cover that. It wasn't a big deal for me. But it was $600, and I'm reading a statistic that says 40% of Americans cannot find $400. So what's going to happen when the next recession hits? Because you can be sure that people will lose their jobs, and with the slow growth that we have in our economy, people in the next recession are going to lose their jobs. It's going to be harder for them to find. It's going to take longer for them to get employed again. That's a lot of money that they're going to lose. And so if something breaks down, a car, you need a car repair, well, that's not going to be something they can do, because you could easily pay $400 for a car repair, or maybe something happened with another part of your home, a roof might need to be repaired, or something happens with, the sewage backup in your basement, or anything could happen. Could cost you hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And the reason people are not financially prepared is because of bad government policies that create inflation, overtax, overregulate, make everything more expensive. You were talking about rent. More people are struggling with rent now than they were in 2001. And the economy had less wealth in 2001. I mean, if you look at the GDP, gross domestic product, that we had a smaller economy back in 2001, and yet people were easily able to, not easily, but they were better able to pay rent. And I talk about this in my book. Harvard has defined being severely house cost burdened as being in a situation where more than 50% of your income has to go to rent. That's called being severely house cost burdened. And the percentage of people who were severely house cost burdened was higher in 2014 than it was in 2001. Even with the economy being bigger in 2014 than it was in 2001. And people are saving less money. The savings rate is down into the 2 percentile now. That's near an all-time low. You go back 50 years, people were saving 12% of their income. On average, they were saving 12%, and they were making, you could say, about maybe a tenth of how much money they're making now in terms of dollars. 50 years ago, median household income was about $6,000, a little more than $6,000. And people were saving 12%. Now, median household income is around $60,000, and people are saving 2%.
Wow.
So that should tell you that, and people are not buying luxury goods. They're not just splurging. That's not the reason for the low savings rate. It's that things like rent and food and energy and other things like college and health insurance and car insurance and homeowners insurance and taxes, property taxes, business regulations, so many things have gone up. Inflation has just raised the cost of living. So the same things that people bought 50 years ago cost triple, quadruple, quintuple more than they did back then, which is why we can actually make so much more money and save so little. It's because of devaluing the dollar, and I tell you, I don't believe this country will make it through this century.
Wow.
We keep doing the stuff we're doing. Yeah, we won't make it. Something's going to happen. We're not going to make it through this century because, if we don't change course, because we have $1 trillion that we're going to borrow next year, according to the latest projections. And that is due to spending more on Social Security and Medicare. Baby boomers are retiring. They've been retiring since 2011, but they're retiring at the rate of 11,000 a day.
Jeez. And I don't know who's going to pay for that when many in our generation, John, we're not even getting jobs enough to allow us to live on our own, most of us. I ran into a 2016, 2017 graduate making, less than $9 an hour. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know there were people out there still making as little money as that, but this is a person with a college degree making less than $9 an hour, and that's just the reality. So when we have 11,000 people, senior citizens graduating, how does that group of people, how are we able to finance them, in their health care through these government programs when the young people who they're going to be taking the money from can't find decent, employment, decent wages?
Yeah, it's impossible, really. And when you And speaking about a college student, that person who's making $9 an hour probably has $50,000 of debt, and is probably being charged $200-$300 of interest per month. I know that I have loans, and it's not very far off from that example that I just gave you. Mm-hmm. I'm dealing with it, and people are dealing with it, but once again, the reason for that is because the government decided that people needed to go to college back in the 1960s. They created the student loan and grant programs, but really it's the loans that are the issue, because that's where people are getting into debt. They passed the Higher Education Act back in 1965. And, before that, people, even during that decade, people were able to work a job and pay off college as they went. They could have a job where they would work on the weekends during the school year, work during the week during the summer, and they would pay off their student they could pay for college without loans. The government then, under the Great Society, which Chapter 4 talks about the Great Society and how we introduced that because of this idea that we've got to make sure people can go to college and give them money to go, and the inflation of tuition was off and running. And by 1976, people were, between 65 and 76, people were defaulting on student loans and eliminating them in bankruptcy, because back then you could just go to the court and say that, I can't pay these loans. Very soon after leaving college, you could just say, look, I have too much debt. And you could eliminate it in bankruptcy. In 1976, the law was changed that required you to have to pay those loans back for at least 5 years after you graduated. Then you could declare bankruptcy on whatever was left. And then in the 90s, that 5-year waiting period, that 5-year payment period was lengthened to 7 years. Then it was eliminated. When it was eliminated, that's when it became almost impossible to declare bankruptcy on your loans. And then in 2005, the private lenders, they lobbied for a law that allowed their loans to join federal loans as being non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, which is the reason why student loan debt is now $1.4 to $1.5 trillion. And very hard to get rid of it, because only about a quarter of cases to discharge student loans are successful. Most lawyers won't even touch student loans because they know they can't win in court because the law is so strict. So student loans pile up, and if you're making $9 an hour and probably on some federal assistance program, you can forget about paying those loans back in any measurable amount, because you're being charged interest each month.
Right.
As long as you have a balance, you're being charged interest, hundreds of dollars of interest, depending on how much loans you've borrowed out. So this has, and you put everything together: Social Security, government debt, student loan debt, a slow-growing economy that's only growing at 2%. And yeah, that's the reason why I don't believe this country is really going to make it into the next century.
Wow. And John, we talk, or you talk in your book about how, when things go bad, that's when employers become even more selective and even more abusive towards potential employees, because that's when they start getting really picky and really, really selective. And that's where you see some of the most incredible abuse. I want to answer a couple questions from people from your last interview. You mentioned about how, during the times where we had a free market system, that children went out to work. Do you believe there should be an age limit for children to go out there and work, or do you believe that parents could allow their kids as young as 4 or 5 or 6 to go out there and earn money?
I do not believe that there should be any kind of government-imposed age limit. Now, and as you see in chapter 3, I talk about the Great Depression. Well, I talk in chapter 2. Chapter 2, I talk about things dealing with banking, but not banking, but the Depression. Mm-hmm. But chapter 3, I think I do get into child labor laws. Yes. Because during the Great Depression, we had a whole lot of new reforms come out. And one of them that we still have today is the Fair Labor Standards Act, which outlawed child labor. Now, what that really basically meant is it set some age limits, like around 15 or 16, before you can get into certain occupations, a lower age for a few others. But should there be any federal or government imposed age limits? I don't believe so. Because if you look at the history of child labor, the worst child labor occurs under the most impoverished conditions. If you want to see, and I think all of us want to see, a world where children do not have to grunt it out like adults, the only way you're really going to solve that is with economic productivity. Economic productivity makes the goods and services less expensive because as you're producing more and more of them, the price goes down and whatever wage you have becomes more valuable automatically. This is what was taking place during the Industrial Revolution. The cost of goods was falling. At the same time, wages were going up. So parents who had their children in the workforce were pulling their children out of the workforce because they didn't have to work as hard. They didn't have to work as many hours. Their wages had more value. They could buy more. So the family did not have to work as hard. And you see the rate of child labor dropping from the late 1880s, from the 1880s, which is the earliest time we have child labor statistics for, to 1930, when the Depression is underway. And by the time we pass a child labor law in 1938, there is basically no child labor. I mean, yeah, there's a few people, but it's less than 1%. And the reason is because our economy grew. We produced our way out of poverty. So age limits actually will not it will not prevent young children from going into the workforce. I talk in chapter 3 about the nation of Cameroon. And Cameroon is a Central African country, and they have child labor today. About half, if not slightly more than half, of children in Cameroon ages 5 to 14 are in the labor force. Mm. And the thing about that is they have a child labor law that says it is illegal for anyone under the age of 14 to work, even as an apprentice. That's a law that's on the books in Cameroon, and it's been on the books for 26 years. And yet they have, according to our own Department of Labor, among the highest rates of child labor in the world, because it's a very poor country and food costs a lot more in relation to incomes. People in Cameroon spend about half their income on food.
Wow.
Just like Americans did a century ago. So they've got to work really hard, and their children are in dangerous jobs. I mean, we're talking ages 5 to 14, just like it was in America. And it's all about making the money so that they can make sure that everyone can eat.
Mm-hmm.
And when the cost of food comes down, when the economy becomes more productive, child labor will fall. But in that country, it is still very poor. And if we had a child labor law in that country that said, well, we do. But notice it's not being followed. It's not being obeyed. The law is on the books. You can't have a job until you're 14, and yet half of children ages 5 to 14 are working because it's out of economic necessity. It's an attempt to survive. So that's why I don't support child labor laws or age restrictions, because people have to be able to survive before they can think about anything else. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to work in a dangerous situation or have their children work in a dangerous situation. But we really need to thank those who came before us, who helped produce the goods and services, who innovated better production techniques, who invested in things that made production faster, like the assembly line, which greatly increased the production of a car, and how the Bessemer converter greatly increased the production of steel. The cotton gin greatly increased the production of cotton. Dynamite greatly increased the ability to dig into the earth and to do construction projects and build canals and other things that helped increase the flow of goods and services. Mm-hmm. That's the reason that our children do not have to work like they used to have to work. It's because of productivity, and as far as an age limit, I would not support that, because all that does is keep people out of the workforce who may need to be in the workforce. And as we see in Cameroon, there is an age limit, and nobody is obeying it because they have to survive, and they can't allow the law to get in the way of surviving.
Wow. And it's crazy because, yes, these African countries and they've been doing it for years, as you said. Over almost 30 years. And having their children doing these dangerous jobs, some of them getting maimed, even killed, just trying to put food on the table. I think, John, this is kind of one of those conversations where we know what we need to do to fix America, but as you said, we're continuing to make the wrong mistakes time and time again. Unfortunately, we're going to have to come to a crossroads when something happens, and then that's maybe when we'll finally make the change back to, again, having a currency that's backed by some kind of scarce resource, finally electing leaders who, believe in the free market. It sucks that we have to, get all the way to that level. But can you talk about what a collapse looks like? Can you give us an idea? What does, day zero look like? When the printing machine, can't print any more money.
Yeah, well, we do have plenty of examples from history of how bad it can get, what it would look like. I think this would be worse than all of them just because of the magnitude of how much debt that's unpayable is on our backs. But when things begin to collapse, the government is going to have a decision to make. Do they come in and try to stop the collapse, or do they let it go as far as it needs to go? I am a proponent of letting the bottom fall out, letting everything that has to drop in value drop as far as it needs to go. But my guess is that the government is not going to allow the collapse to finish, because they didn't do that 10 years ago. They didn't do that in the Great Depression in the 1930s. That's the reason we had a depression, is that the government came in after the collapse began. Instead of letting it just happen, they came in with all kinds of programs and regulations that made the collapse worse. So what's the collapse going to look like? Well, unemployment will definitely go up. And we've been hovering at 4.1% for like 6 months. I think the unemployment rate just dropped to 3.9%, which is the lowest it's the lowest we've had since 2000, but it's not a low unemployment rate if you compare it to what we had during the 20th century on numerous occasions. But when things start to collapse, unemployment will go up 4%, 5%. We could hit double-digit unemployment, and I'm pretty sure that we will. There's only 2 times in our history since the Great Depression in which we had double-digit unemployment, and that was the early 80s and the late 2000s. And so if we have a collapse, we're not only going to see unemployment skyrocket, and I believe it will go above 10%. But the stock market will definitely drop. It's kind of dropping now, but it will definitely drop a lot more. Some economists are saying that it will drop 70% or more. And that's not unheard of. We saw the stock market drop nearly 90% during the 1930s. So that is something that could definitely happen. A lot of people are going to lose money. They've got money in the stock market. You got 401ks now because, see, the pensions are going away. The pension generation has gotten the last of the pensions, almost. And now what companies are doing is they're having employees invest their own money and trying to match it at 5% or whatever. And that money's in the stock market. And when that thing drops, there's going to be a lot of panic because you're talking about people's retirements and life savings. You may have someone who's 55 years old who's trying to just make it another 10 years or 7 years, and they got money in the stock market. That's what they're going to live on during their retirement. And if that money is lost, they're thinking, man, I'm not going to be able to retire because I don't have a pension. I have a 401k. I've got some money, I've got some kind of mutual fund or portfolio that has 80 or 90% invested in stocks. And when that thing comes down, then people are going to want to pull their money out. And now when they do that, that's going to accelerate the crash. It's the herd mentality. They see a drop, they pull out, which makes the drop worse. More people pull out. Mm-hmm. It's a run. It's how banks fail. If there's word that any bank is about to fail, the depositors are going to trickle in, and they're going to pull their money out, and that's going to cause interest rates to go up. That's going to cause the bank to have to borrow more. And more people will come to the bank and pull their money out. Interest rates will go up higher. Now what that means is it's going to cost more to borrow money. More businesses are going to fail because they can't borrow money because the interest rate is too high. So the failure will cause layoffs, and that will accelerate not just the number of people who are out of work, but many of them are going to get on unemployment insurance, which will also cost a fortune. We spent $500 billion, over $500 billion on unemployment benefits during the last recession and afterward. That's the most expensive payout of unemployment in history during the last recession and a few years after. So that will cost the government money. The government will have to borrow more. Well, if they have to borrow more, then they're going to have to raise Treasury bond rates. So when those rates go up, the debt of the federal government will go up even faster than before. And to pay that debt, to pay the interest, that's when the money printing comes in. They print money because they're not going to be able to borrow cheap anymore. If interest rates are going up, then they can't borrow cheap unless they get loans from the Federal Reserve. And, of course, they print the money, and then they send it to the Fed, and then the Fed loans it back to the government. So it's it's a circle. And it's all it does is just indebt the entire economy and create inflation. And then the cost of a house will end up going up even more, the cost of everything. This can snowball really quickly. It'll start probably very slowly, but it can very quickly turn into a global financial crisis because, see, you have other banks involved, you have other countries involved.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and really, we're in a world now where all you need is one thing to go wrong somewhere. It could drag the whole world down.
Wow. John, I gotta be frank with you, man. I mean, I can't lie that I've gotten to the point where me personally, where I've been generating now income from affiliate marketing, trading, YouTube, various kind of, websites that use basically, my content to, make money off advertising, and then I make a percentage off the advertising. And as I've gotten better with that, it's the biggest problem is been just the cost of just being an American, right? Just the cost of being an American has constantly been rising and interfering with me being able to really build, my lifestyle the way I want to. And what many people in my position have done, and they eventually do, is where they just end up checking out. They say, you know what? I'm going to take my talents to Indonesia. I'm going to take my talents to Singapore. I'm going to take my talents to Rwanda, somewhere in South America. I mean, they decide to say, you know what? I'm going to take this couple $1,000s a month that I make, and I'm going to go somewhere where I get a bigger bang for my buck. We're also starting to see that now with retirees who are saying, you know what? I can't afford to retire in America. I'm going to go to another country. Obviously, you've spoken to why that is, but do you see that as something that will slow down or maybe even accelerate as we continue to go through this stage of increasing inflation?
Oh, it will accelerate because see, advisors are already telling people to do that. One of the people who manages money that I trust when it comes to economic, telling us what's happening, is a hedge fund manager by the name of Peter Schiff, he's the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital, and that's a hedge fund. He manages the money of billions of dollars that he manages. I believe that's what I've heard. But he tells his people basically get out of the U.S. because this country has bad fiscal policy. It's got bad monetary policy. It's got bad regulatory and tax policy. And this is not the place you're going to want to be because inflation is most likely going to surge upward because there's so much fear of what will happen if the government does not save everybody and bail everybody out in the next recession. There's so much fear about what's going to happen and how many people are going to lose their homes and their jobs and their retirements, and there's fears of just rioting, possibly. I mean, that always tends to happen when things get tight economically. It's happening in Argentina. It's been happening in Greece. It's been happening in even countries that are dictatorships, like Iran, like Egypt. So when things get tight, there's going to be fear that the people will rise up. Mm. And so the government wants to bail out people, even though it shouldn't. They want to save people from letting the economy crash. But they're not saving them. They're just postponing whatever they can postpone until a later date, and then it will come back in greater force, like we saw with the financial crisis. All that money was printed, trillions of dollars. Bailouts for banks, bailouts for corporations. And even though the markets crashed, even though the economy crashed, it didn't crash all the way because the money came in to save it. So we end up in an early recovery, although it's the slowest recovery we've ever had, because now we've got to deal with inflation. We've got to deal with excess regulations and taxes. So the economy's been growing very slowly on average, 2% a year for the decade, which is why the debt continues to grow. Another reason the debt continues to grow, and all that does is put us right in the line of fire of another financial crisis, which So in other words, by saving the economy, we actually made the economy in greater danger of self-destruction. And that's the reason why governments they should not attempt to save anybody. But there's so much fear over what the people are going to do and how bad it's going to be if the government were to allow everything to come crashing down. So my guess is that the inflation will come in, and when that happens, the irony is that in an attempt to bail out the entire economy and save everyone, they're going to make the situation so much worse that the people are going to rise up for a different reason against the government. They'll be complaining about inflation. Instead of unemployment, they'll be complaining about inflation. And that's even worse because inflation just steals everybody's wealth. It steals prosperity. When you lose your job, you may be unemployed for a little bit, but you can get another job in an economy that's creating jobs and recovery. But if inflation continues, then it won't even matter if you have a job. You will still get poorer and poorer because inflation will eat up your income gains. So that is why I am someone who advocates for a total collapse, a total default of the U.S. government, cut Social Security, cut Medicare, cut out of every single program. And I would like to see really all these programs eliminated. And that's the only way. We are not going to make it by trying to maintain everything. Look at Argentina. They've been doing that, and they have an inflation rate of 40%, which is the last time America had an inflation rate of 40% was during the Civil War and the American Revolution. We've not seen anything like that, and they're enduring that today because the governments just will not get off the printing presses. So, but once again, the people, they have to learn this stuff, and I'm really happy to be out here, giving my take because this is coming.
Yeah.
The recession could begin this year, possibly. Maybe next year. I doubt that we're going to go through next year without it having at least started.
All right, that's one thing I can't wait for, John, because people like us, it's going to benefit us the most. I mean, the most fearful people when we talk about a recession are the wealthy. They're the one that are incredibly terrified because they're hoping that there might be a bailout to prevent that, but hopefully there'll be no bailout, and that means people like us will be able to finally have well, hopefully a currency that works in our best interest, a government that works in our best interest, and be able to properly afford homes, properly have a life again. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I've had a hard time trying to convince people is that, especially people from the bottom, is that, you like let government go. This idea that we're going to have that government can save us or can prevent us, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I can point to YouTube commentators like Boyce Watkins, or he's more of a do-it-yourselfer, but Yvette Carnell and some of these, pro-left speakers who think that government is going to cut us a check. I don't want that check from government because I know that check is going to come with strings attached. It's going to come with higher prices. It's going to come with a life that gives me more misery, and that doesn't free me from the bondage that I already feel as someone who's trying to do their own thing in this economy and dealing with increasing costs that aren't my fault. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to live.
Yeah.
And
that check.
Right. And costs are coming up and increasing and it's ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And how, other people in other countries aren't dealing with it, but they are dealing with, but on their level, right? Obviously with their currency. But the point that I was making was just that the fact that, I even have to consider leaving the United States of America and have to exploit another country's, poverty or really, injustice, some might say, based on the fact that their currency is a lot less valuable than ours, even though their economy may be better managed than ours. They may be growing at a greater GDP than ours.
Two places that I know for sure have been at the top of the list in terms of economic freedom and prosperity are Hong Kong and Singapore. Mm-hmm. And these are basically like city-states, very small. I don't even think Hong Kong is officially a country, but these Hong Kong and Singapore are definitely great places. Unemployment very low, like 1% or 2%.
Wow.
I mean, these are prosperous areas. They have very low crime rates. They have very high rates of productivity. I mean, their per capita GDP is rivaling ours. And not just those places, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, and there are a few others who are ahead of the United States as far as great places to invest and maximize as much as you can out of your money. Because let me tell you, if the government cuts you a check, that check won't go far. I can guarantee you. In a world of rising prices, you can get $1,000 check and then find out that it's good enough for a box of cereal, maybe.
Wow.
So it can get that bad. I mean, we've had hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is inflation on steroids. I talk about that in the book. And there's only one time in history in which we had hyperinflation, and that was back during the American Revolution in the 1770s. And the inflation rate for 4 straight years was topping 50% per year. That is, and that is really where Argentina is right now. They are in an inflation that we haven't seen since during those days.
Yeah.
So, we are, but it can always happen because the future is a lot less known when it comes to the particulars than we really think. People have been saying, for example, I remember that it was said that the Earth would run out of oil by 2000?
Yeah.
Or 1990, and we're producing more and we're finding more oil than we ever have before. Because a lot of oil is coming from the polar regions and the ice is melting in certain areas and we're able to extract more oil. Technology has allowed us to access more oil. So that whole belief was totally wrong, but it was a prediction that a lot of people were believing in and was freaking them out. And people say, oh, but, you know, when the economy collapses, it won't be that bad and the money won't lose value. And here's something else. I know this is something that people don't believe will happen, but it is possible that we could start seeing secession take place.
Wow.
Now, there's no way for me to say when or if or what state, but we got to expand the possibilities in our minds about what can happen. Because if we don't do that, we will not prepare ourselves for a situation that we should have been prepared for. California actually is trying to do that, by the way. They have on the ballot this November a proposal to basically split up the state, I think, into 3 states. And that, I don't know, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the language is, but there's a proposal to divide California up into 3 different states.
Right.
And there's also been a proposal to revise the Constitution in California, which said that California is an inseparable part of the United States. There have been proposals to change that so California can actually break away from the U.S. and become its own country because it is such a big economy. I mean, I think it's the 5th largest economy in the world with like $2 trillion, $2 to $3 trillion in GDP.
Wow.
So that's one reason why people say they could be their own country. But secession is something that's a possibility, even if it's a low possibility. That percentage of chance can rise. So if things get bad enough, we got to remember, things can get so bad that a rebellion takes place, and that's how it was for the British. The 13 colonies were under British control for a century. The British thought that they were going to be in charge forever, and they raised taxes, and they fought a war with France, and they conscripted and drafted people against their will, and they violated their rights, putting soldiers in people's homes without their consent. And they ended up sparking the American Revolution, which resulted in all 13 of those territories breaking away. So it can happen, even though people think that we're a better country and that we won't do something like that. No one can say where we're going to be exactly 10 years from now, right, or 20 years from now. But we can say that we're on the road to devastation economically the way we're going, because we have no way of paying off all this debt the way we're going, and it will have to implode.
Wow. Wow. And John, I mean, we're gonna have to be prepared for that. And I definitely believe, you say a century, I think it could happen within our lifetime, John. I think we'll be older, but I definitely think it can happen in our lifetime. I don't see why, this day zero scenario can't happen within the next 25 to 30 years, God willing. I don't see why not, on the pace that we're going, on the way that our government is printing out cash ready, that is cutting taxes but refusing to cut spending. We had Trump come out earlier this week talking about another tax cut. I mean, this is Let me get on that. It's ridiculous, man.
I saw that, and on one hand, I do want taxes to be cut lower, because the one that was passed last year, it only gave the big cut for the corporations.
Right.
But he cannot do that and then say we're going to spend more money. And earlier this year, he signed a spending bill that was going to spend an extra $1 trillion. And then the Senate, as I was saying earlier, with Rand Paul's budget, got voted down. This was a bill to actually cut trillions of dollars out of the next decade of government spending. It was voted down. Now, my guess is that if there's no information on what kind of new tax cuts Trump wants, but if in fact they come out with a new tax cut bill that cuts taxes even more, they will not be able to do that, to vote for that, pass that, and then not end up with bigger deficits, because they want to spend more money, but they want to tax less. I'm all for taxing less, but you can't spend more. You can't go in opposite directions when it comes to taxes and spending, which is what they have been doing. The Republicans have been doing that, and that's why we're going to have to borrow more than $1 trillion next year. And it will cause interest rates to go up. And they're already rising. That's why the stock market is falling. Interest rates are rising. They're going to have to rise even more when the government has to borrow more. So this tax cut bill, I'm all for cutting taxes. I wish we could eliminate the income tax. But you can't do that if you plan to spend more money. If you want to keep government programs like Social Security and Medicare, which together are 1/3 of all federal spending. Just those two programs are 1/3 of all federal spending. If you add Medicaid and military spending, you are talking about 70% of the federal budget. Just four things: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, military. 70%. And project it to cost more over time. You can't do that and then cut taxes and then think you're not going to have big deficits. So I want to see lower and lower taxes, but even more than that, I want to see them actually cut spending. And for them to vote against the only budget that would have actually reduced spending in any respectable way tells me they really do not care about doing what's right. They only care about doing what they think will sell to their voters. Absolutely. And their voters, unfortunately, are incredibly ignorant, and they don't understand how economics and fiscal policy and how budgeting works.
Absolutely, John. And I mean, there's so much ignorance, even on the right. I mean, as much as we hear about freedom and liberty from the right, I mean, they're incredibly dumb when it comes to economics. I mean, the idea that we can continue as a country to have this big military that produces all of these arms and weapons and sends them all over the world. And I mean, we've got what they said nearly 50,000 troops in Germany, and now we're opening a new base in Ghana. And now, I mean, this is just it's just crazy. I mean, it's just crazy. And there was a really interesting interview, not an interview, it was a sit-down kind of speech that Trump had where he talked about how the government spent $2 trillion in Iraq. $2 trillion.
I actually think it's close to $3 trillion.
Oh my God! And I think that's bigger than our deficit, if I'm not correct, or at least close.
Oh
to
yeah.
It.
It's yeah.
I mean, this is just, it's as if we know what we're doing is wrong, and our leaders don't care. I mean, $2 to $3 trillion in Iraq. We haven't till today, John. I mean, this started when, before we graduated from high school, until today. I haven't been in high school for over 10, 14, 15 years, and we haven't benefited anything from it. We haven't gotten anything from it. I don't.
No, we made it worse.
Yeah, I mean, we made the Middle
we made
East
it worse.
The Middle East is worse now than it's ever been. Incredibly more unstable. I mean, it's just, we need major intervention right now, man. I think, either we need some aliens to just show up, or we just need something to happen to where this can all just come to an end, because we're doing it all wrong.
When the Iraq thing, interesting how, we invade Iraq and we spend $3 trillion and we lose, I think, 4,000 soldiers, a little more than 4,000 soldiers.
For what?
And you're right. And what came out of that was something called ISIS, a terrorist organization that ended up going to Syria and setting up bases there, and then we start to lob missiles and send troops to Syria. So ISIS spreads out, and then they go to Libya, and then we have to wage a war there. We have to put troops on the ground, and I don't know if we have troops on the ground. We probably do, but we have definitely launched missiles and air attacks on Libya. This came out of a country that, we got to be honest about history, Saddam Hussein, as brutal as he was, did not have to worry about terrorism, because nobody would dare even try to organize or utter a word of conspiracy of any kind. And of course, false pretenses were the motivation. The justification was done under false pretenses, and it was a totally unilateral war. Nobody hardly was with us. Everybody protested against it. And we went in and we overthrew a government that was actually there making sure terrorism did not take place. So once terrorism comes in, it's costing us more money because now it has migrated outside of the country of Iraq. It has gone everywhere. And we're putting troops and missiles and bombs in all of these other countries to fight the terrorism that came out of Iraq after we overthrew the government that made sure terrorism wouldn't exist there. So this is another problem with American policy and foreign policy. It's just costing us more money. It's creating hatred, which inspires terrorism among a few people. And so this is why the Republicans say we need a big military, because we've got to fight terrorism. But, of course, that terrorism really is an outgrowth of our big military. And they don't want to cut the budget. They don't want to cut government spending because they think, oh, man, we're not spending enough. We've got all of these threats out there. And yet the threats are the result of our own making. And we need to, and this is why when you watch the news, I would limit how much education you get from the news. There is no historical context, hardly, when watching the news, because it's quick. It's a few minutes here, a few minutes there, a few seconds here, and they just tell you what happened during the day, and often no historical context of any meaningful way provided to let you know why the event that's happening is happening. So it's we're shooting ourselves in the foot, not just internationally, but domestically. And that's why I say, not only are we not going to make it to the next century, but like you say, 20 or 30 years, that's a good range.
Yeah.
That's right upon us, because it's just too many things are not going right, and it's accelerating. And at some point, we're going to realize, we don't realize it right now, but we're going to realize it, that we cannot keep going any further, because our economy will actually begin to fold in on itself and prevent us from actually coming up with the means to do what we're doing. And really, the beautiful thing about that is at least it will bring an end to this, hopefully. But I would rather we do it in a more orderly way. Mm-hmm. Get taxes cut, but cut spending even more. Reduce these regulations. Make it easier for people to start a business. Make it easier for people, and the way you do that is reducing regulations, taxes, inflation. Government should not be helping anybody with anything. They should be letting the free market take care of all these things. And the free market always works to create value. Absolutely. To make prices lower, to make the quality of goods and services higher. We have to allow that to take place, and we're doing less and less, and the day of reckoning is going to come real soon.
John, obviously, we talked about this on the last show, but I mean, things have gotten, I wouldn't say even worse, but it's just the fact that we live in a social media society. We're seeing, videos every day of, police brutality. One thing I love about the idea of your book and, again, embracing a free market ideology. And please, for those of you guys who are confused of what we're doing, please go on YouTube, check out great videos like Free to Choose and many of the other things like that can get you even a better primer on what we're discussing here. And, of course, check out his book, Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. And it is in the description, less than $20. Best $20 you'll ever spend this year, folks. Get the book. The fact that, billions of dollars, I don't know, maybe not billions, but several $100 million from our federal government, John, is going into these police departments that are able to basically live off these federal dollars and engage in sustaining departments that are incredibly huge. I mean, we're talking about a city like Ferguson that only has like 10,000 people, but has over 400 officers. I mean, just ridiculous amounts of federal money going into local municipalities. And obviously, because we have, draconian drug laws, and this kind of perpetuates this kind of police brutality and what we're seeing out here. And again, because many on the left don't understand how government, the government they want to save them is actually hurting them. It's actually causing the pain that you want to run away from. But here's the thing though, John, on the right, we see that tendency where it's, I want freedom and liberty, but I still want to support our troops. I still want to support our local police, or I still want farm subsidies. I still want corporate subsidies. I mean, we can't have it either, both ways. You either want to be a free market capitalist, you want to support free market ideology, or you want to, be a socialist economy. And that tendency to have it both ways, both parties are just corrupt on that. And that's, I hope, something that we can finally learn. But I don't know if you want to extend anything on those comments.
Well, I was saying this last time that the Democrats are, they tell you what they believe in, but they believe the wrong thing. And the Republicans just flat out lie to you and don't tell you what they believe. So it's a lose-lose situation. Picking any person who comes out of these two parties. Now, Rand Paul is a true exception. He's politically a Republican, but ideologically he's a libertarian, and the only person worth voting for. So he is the only person who I would definitely give a pass to, because he's really not a Republican. He's in the Republican Party because it's easier for him to win a seat to the Senate as a Republican than as a Libertarian. But he is a Libertarian at heart, which is why he will propose things nobody else will propose, like cutting our budget, all spending by 1% a year. Nobody came up with that. I mean, that's his proposal, and it was voted down by most Republicans. So, because these guys, that's why it's a lose-lose situation when you're talking Democrats and Republicans. Democrats believe wrong, and Republicans don't believe in what they say they believe. So I don't support anybody voting for a non-libertarian. Libertarians need to get more support. They're out there. They have a party. They have a national committee. They run a candidate for president every year. They've been around for 40, almost 50 years. The Libertarian Party actually formed in 1971 to protest the government terminating the gold standard. And they have not gotten hardly any traction. But that's really because people just, I think, are unaware of the libertarians and what they believe. And with you're talking about police brutality and drugs. The drug war is number one for bringing that on to people. The police can come and break down your door, literally, and they can come and tear up your house, and because they were told that there were drugs in the house. That's police brutality. When they stop you, and you have to basically get on the ground or be handcuffed. I mean, if there's any hint that there might be drugs in your car, that you might be involved in drug trafficking, they will treat you like you're an enemy combatant on the battlefield. And all because of the fact that the government has so criminalized certain substances. None of this was happening in the days when we had legalization. So, the drug war has got to stop, and I'm happy to say that we are seeing more states legalizing marijuana, not just for medical use, but for recreational use too, because if you want to get the police off you, you can't just have medical marijuana. You've got to take them out of the drug business. And there's actually a proposal to get marijuana taken out of the controlled substances list, which I hope succeeds. But really the controlled substances list has to be taken down. It's got to be repealed. And that also began in the early 70s. And that's the only way we can make serious progress in terms of police and community relations, because they have so much power. The DEA can actually go to a foreign country and go after people who are involved in the drug trade. That's how powerful they are, just because of the drug war. They can do what no one else, even the FBI cannot do that. The DEA can go to a foreign country. You're involved in drug smuggling, then they can come after you. Mm-hmm. So, and the DEA has only gotten more revenue, more agents have been added to the force, and we have got to go in the other direction, and not just legalize drugs, but we got to legalize all these personal behaviors. Prostitution and gambling are two other things that are illegal throughout the country, with the exception of Nevada for prostitution and gambling. But it's more harassment and it's more confrontations that we have to deal with police, just for something that we're doing in the privacy of our own home or of a restaurant or a place we might be at. And I know you would cut down probably half or more than half of these confrontations we have with police if you were to just legalize a lot of these things people do.
Absolutely. Legalize and also cut these federal subsidies, DARE program. I don't know if you remember that, John, the DARE, where it's literally a federal subsidy. I mean, I don't know. I know that it was on tap to get cut. I think it's still there. But just the fact that the government can give these local police departments anything. I mean, it's just, I don't want my tax dollars to go in to support the Ferguson Police Department. I didn't give the government permission to do that. To take my money to support, to buy a tank or this camera or that camera. I didn't cut that check. I didn't give them the permission to do that.
Yeah, and And it also, the government putting subsidies into a state, they're effectively owning that state because, whoever gives you money controls what you do. So when the government comes in with subsidies and they make a state or they make a police department dependent on the federal government can tell them what to do. This is the reason why the drinking age went from 18 to 21. There's actually no federal regulation that requires any state to have its drinking age be 21. The states can choose. They can abolish the drinking age if they want to, and I wish they would. But what the federal government has done, this is what was passed back in the early mid-'80s. There was a bill passed that said states that do not raise their drinking age or their the age that you can consume alcohol from 18 to 21, states that don't do that are going to see a cut in their highway funding. So the government funds the highways in all 50 states. And in return, the states have sent their drinking age up to 21 from 18. This was back in the 1980s. And no state will dare lower it because if they do, they will lose money for their highways. So the federal government controls the drinking age without actually having to pass a mandate. It's just money. The government simply uses money to control the laws in our states. Because any state can lower the drinking age. There's no federal law that has to be changed to do that, because these are state laws. But the federal government uses money to influence state laws. It's another way of government control entering into our lives without actually having to take it over. And it's more difficult to get a federal law passed. So oftentimes the government will say, or the people representing in Congress will say, we can't get a federal law passed, so let's just offer subsidies and then tell them what the strings are attached to those subsidies. And that's not just the drinking age, but the blood alcohol legal limit of 0.08. That is also something that is influenced by the federal government, because there is no federal law that says it's got to be 0.8 and no more or you're illegal. It's all about highway funds and pulling highway funds away from states that don't comply.
Wow. Whew. John, it's a lot to discuss about our government, about our institutions. Our families are falling apart. We have so many broken homes in this country today, getting worse by the day. And as these stressors, as we talked about earlier, of lack of income, increased housing costs, it's only going to put even more stress on people, on their emotions, and lead to more and more chaos and broken homes in our society. Before we roll out, are there anything you want to put out there for the American people listening today?
Yeah, well, just to add a little bit on what you said about broken homes, that is a direct result of the welfare state that began during the 1960s. And we had very few broken homes before the 1960s. 1960s, welfare becomes easy, and maintaining a home with two parents becomes less necessary. So homes begin to disintegrate over the course of the next 50 years, directly related to welfare. And we've always had welfare, but there's a big difference between how it's doled out when it's coming from a private, non-profit organization and when it's coming from the government. We've always had welfare, but we've never had welfare and broken homes
Right.
until the 1960s and afterward, because it became too easy. Government made it it was all about the Great Society, ending poverty, making life better for people in America, and it got worse because it took away the incentives for people to maintain stable homes. It put money in place of a intact family. So we had more and more families that were less intact, and that continues to this day. And yet, and once again, another irony, the very people who are suffering from broken homes support getting more welfare and strengthening the welfare state,
Right.
not realizing that it is the reason why they have to grow up without a dad. Because, hey, their mom didn't need him. She could take care of her 3-4 kids or whatever without him. And their kids grew up learning that the welfare saved them, the welfare allowed their mom to take care of them, and now they're leaders in the community, and they're congressmen and senators pushing for more welfare, the very thing that caused them to grow up in a broken home. People don't know that. And so that's the reason nobody is going to consciously advocate for something that they see as in their best interest. They have to not know that something is against their best interest to push for it. And that's another reason why I'm glad that I'm able to be on your show, and I'm glad that I'm able to get my book out there, because ignorance can turn against you. Ignorance really can cause you to push for the thing that will destroy you without even knowing.
Wow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was the man himself. You requested him again. I brought him back on. Jonathan Bogan, again, author of Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. The link is in the description. Get the book. Get the book. Get the book. Completely worth the read. It's a very simple read. It's easy to understand. Just the way you break it down, John. You did such a great job with this book. It took you years to write, and it came together so beautifully, man. I think this is one of those books that is eventually going to land into classrooms and universities all across America. I have no doubt about that in time as people find the information in this book, because it's timeless information. It's timeless information, and people are going to have to unfortunately learn the hard way, but you can see it coming if you get this book, Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. John, thank you so much for being on the show, bro.
I appreciate the chance to be back, and hopefully I'll be back, and we will discuss the issues that come before us.
Absolutely. Thank you again, John, and have a good night, man.
You too.
All right. So that was Jonathan Bogan. Thank you guys for watching the show. I'll be back live streaming very, very soon. But I just kind of wanted to put this out there to keep you guys satisfied. And look, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, as traders, we have to do what's in our best interest for our families and for ourselves. Make money all kind of different ways. But, when you're trying to make money and at the end of the day, your costs are increasing, your government isn't working in your favor, it's like running a hamster wheel, and you're never really able to get ahead, particularly if you're a trader like myself who doesn't come from money, and you're accumulating resources, but those resources are being swallowed up by increasing cost. So we're in a situation where the wealthiest of wealthy, they're making more money, compounding gains from decades upon decades upon decades ago, and yet us as young people, we're not getting ahead as much as we want to, because, for example, my housing cost is increasing. My healthcare cost is increasing. My cost of raising my children are increasing. So making 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or whatever it is, it's not like it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. That gain goes a lot less than it did. And every single day it's getting, the ability for that money to go further and further is shrinking. Is shrinking. And I've got some very difficult decisions that I've got to make for my life that I'm going to have to make really soon. Thank you for watching the show. Please subscribe if this is your first time watching. Check out my sponsors, No Direction Trading, Black Box Stocks. All my sponsors. I appreciate all of them. And support the show anyway, anyhow. Thanks again. Tune in next time.